Ewan Doyle was a ghost in the criminal world, unseen, untouchable, and utterly ruthless. Moira Kincaid laundered millions through smiling lies and spotless ledgers. Fraser Boyd left bodies behind like cigarette ash, and Callum Reid could erase your existence with a single keystroke. But Detective Isla MacRae? She was the mistake they never saw coming.
This is the true story of how Scotland's deadliest gang rose to power, and how one woman risked everything to bring them down. In the heart of Glasgow's East End, where boarded-up buildings whispered stories of hardship and silence hung heavy,
in alleyways a storm was quietly forming. It began not with bloodshed or sirens, but with a single name, the Black Thistle. Nobody knew where it came from at first. Whispers in pubs, murmurs between dealers, the sudden disappearance of a known thug. But those who paid attention saw the signs. Something ruthless was taking shape in the shadows, and it moved with discipline that ordinary street gangs lacked. The center of this silent rise was Ewan Doyle, a man few had seen up close but whose name was spoken with careful respect. A former military tactician dishonorably discharged after an undisclosed incident during a foreign deployment, Doyle had returned to civilian life with scars that ran deeper than flesh. Some said he brought the war back with him. Others said he never left it behind. Using contacts he'd made abroad, and a calculating mind sharpened by years of combat logistics, he began to form a network unlike any Scotland had seen before. He didn't recruit the loud or reckless. He chose soldiers, thinkers, and loyalists. Among them was Fraser Boyd, a former underground boxer with a reputation for settling disputes not with words, but with fists like hammers. Boyd had been banned from every legitimate league after putting a man in a coma during a rigged match. Then there was Callum Reid, once a top computer science student at the University of Strathclyde, expelled after hacking into student records and altering grades for money. He moved from manipulating databases to emptying digital vaults without a trace. Moira Kincaid was perhaps the most unpredictable piece in the puzzle, a nightclub manager with links to old Edinburgh crime families, a woman with charm on the surface and steel underneath. She laundered money through property firms, tourism businesses, and a chain of elite clubs that catered to Scotland's wealthiest and most corrupt. Their rise was swift, but it was far from reckless. Ewan believed in control. The Black Thistle first took over small-time drug operations in Glasgow, replacing the chaotic local dealers with organized, regimented distribution. There were rules, payments on time, products clean. Violence was rare, but when it came, it was final. Competitors were not given warnings. They were erased. The gang expanded its reach to Scotland's ports, importing heroin and synthetic drugs from the Balkans, using legitimate shipping companies as cover. Through forged documents and blackmail, they infiltrated customs. The profits were astronomical, and within 2 years, they were funneling millions through international accounts. But they didn't stop at drugs. They began dealing weapons, military-grade, firearms, some stolen, others smuggled in from Eastern Europe. Then came human trafficking, young women from Eastern Europe and North Africa, promised jobs but delivered into nightmare. And always, wherever they struck, a small token was left behind, a black thistle, either real or etched into the wall. It became their signature, their calling card. Fear spread like fire through the criminal underworld. Rival gangs vanished, or submitted and paid tribute. Some tried to fight back, but their bodies were later found in the River Clyde or beneath, burned-out vehicles in the Highlands. Even the police were not untouched. Bribes flowed freely. Those who didn't accept money were threatened, and those who resisted simply disappeared. The silence was enforced not just by fear but by doubt. No one could prove anything. Witnesses changed their stories or withdrew. Completely. Surveillance footage was lost, and paper trails led nowhere. But it was a gun deal in Aberdeen that finally went wrong. A disagreement with a group of Russian arms dealers turned into a massacre. 4 bodies, mutilated and dumped in the River Dee, were discovered by hikers. The Russian embassy demanded answers. The press caught hold of the story. Politicians started asking questions. Among those watching closely, was Detective Isla MacRae, a woman whose past was tangled with Glasgow's underworld. She had grown up not far from the streets now controlled by the Black Thistle. Her younger brother had been killed in a gang-related drive-by years before. She had buried him with a vow that one day she would tear down the system that allowed such monsters to thrive. Now, for the first time, she had a name. She had a symbol, and she had a reason to go to war. What she didn't realize was that this war would cost more than she ever imagined, and that the gang she planned to take down had already started watching her back. Detective Isla MacRae understood, early on, that this case was unlike anything she had handled before. The Black Thistle wasn't a street gang or a group of impulsive criminals. It was a well-oiled machine, secretive, disciplined, and smart. She couldn't rely on routine investigations or standard procedures. Too many of her colleagues were compromised, and too many doors closed the moment she knocked. The corruption ran deep, and she could feel it tightening around her like a noose. She built a small task force in secret. Only 5 people, each chosen for their skill and loyalty. They operated outside regular channels, kept their movements quiet, and communicated in person whenever possible. Digital traces could be followed, phones could be tapped. She had seen it happen to other investigators. Some of them had ended up ruined. One disappeared altogether. The task force began combing through property records, financial data, and surveillance footage. They created a map of the gang's operations, a sprawling web connecting nightclubs, trucking companies, luxury car dealerships, and even a private security firm. Shell companies in the Highlands, real estate purchases in rural areas with no clear explanation. The money trail was complex, but patterns started to emerge. They discovered that Moira Kincaid was the key to the gang's finances. Nearly every asset passed through her hands at some point. Her movements were discreet, her transactions legal on paper, but underneath the surface, there were signs of fraud and intimidation. Witnesses refused to speak. Lawyers arrived before subpoenas. The moment Isla's team got close to anything real, it vanished. Files deleted, servers wiped, properties suddenly sold. It was as if someone was watching their every step. Then came an unexpected break. A drug raid in a rundown tenement led to the arrest of Jamie Kerr, a low-level courier with ties to Fraser Boyd. He was nervous, sweating, and visibly frightened. In the interview room, Jamie claimed he didn't know much, but then he made an offer. In exchange for protection, he would give up the gang's laundering network. According to him, millions were being funneled through front businesses in the Highlands, and there was more. A mole within Police Scotland was feeding the Black Thistle information. That revelation changed everything. If true, it explained how raids were always anticipated, how trails went cold just before arrests. But it also meant that Isla and her team were in danger. Trust was now a weapon, and she had no idea who was using it against her. Jamie was placed under protective custody, guarded around the clock. Yet within 48 hours he was dead. Officially, it was ruled a suicide. Isla didn't believe that for a second. The cell had no surveillance footage. The guard on duty had suddenly fallen ill that night. The evidence had vanished. Jamie's silence had been bought, and someone in the system had helped make it happen. Her team grew paranoid. They started using burner phones and meeting in underground parking garages. One member resigned without explanation. Another claimed their house had been broken into but nothing stolen. Isla knew they were being watched. The Black Thistle had eyes inside the force, and she could no longer separate ally from enemy. Then came a package. No return address, hand-delivered, to her desk. Inside was a USB drive. She plugged it into an offline laptop and watched the footage. The video showed Moira Kincaid meeting with a man in uniform. They exchanged a briefcase. They shook hands. The timestamp was recent, and the location was unmistakable, a city council building Isla recognized from previous investigations. The man in the video turned toward the camera briefly, and her heart stopped. It was Chief Superintendent Angus McCall, her direct superior and mentor. The implications were staggering. The man responsible for overseeing the force's anti-organized crime unit was working with the very criminals they were meant to fight. She felt rage, confusion, and disbelief crash over her in waves. He had guided her career, praised her instincts, supported her transfer into major crimes. And now, he was part of the very gang she had vowed to destroy. She couldn't confront him. Not yet. If McCall knew she was onto him, she'd be the next one silenced. Instead, she began planning a new move, something bold, something off the record. She had no choice now. The only way to bring down the Black Thistle was from outside the system, and that meant disappearing. Detective Isla MacRae vanished from official records the following week. To the department, she was on medical leave. In reality, she was deep undercover, using an old alias she had once employed during an operation against a biker gang years ago. With her badge left behind and only one member of her original task force aware of her plan, she slipped into Glasgow's underworld. Her goal was simple: get close enough to understand the structure from the inside and identify the core players for a takedown. But the risk was greater than ever. She wasn't protected by a badge anymore. If they discovered her, there would be no trial, no arrest, only a quiet death and a shallow grave outside the city. She started by inserting herself into a small but aggressive drug crew linked to the Black Thistle. These were street-level distributors, far removed from the decision-makers. But even among the lower ranks, there was order. The crew didn't know names, only codes. Deliveries were made to dead drop sites. Payments were left in numbered bags. No phones, no faces, just shadows and silence. The efficiency chilled her. After a month, Isla earned trust by fixing a shipment route that had been causing delays. Her experience with logistics, masked as criminal know-how, caught the attention of someone higher up. A meeting was arranged, not face-to-face, but through a scrambled voice call from a burner phone. The voice on the other end gave her a new job: oversee a weapons shipment moving through Oban, a coastal town where port security had recently been compromised. She traveled to Oban under the name Ruth Hamilton, using forged documents she had prepared years ago for emergencies. The weapons, military-grade rifles and explosives, were hidden in seafood crates aboard a privately owned fishing vessel. She documented everything in secret, taking photos, tracking serial numbers, and storing it all on an encrypted flash drive. As the deal progressed, she noticed something that struck her as odd. A man watching from a nearby van, never speaking, never intervening. He was too polished to be a smuggler. Clean shoes, expensive watch, well-fed face. When she discreetly followed him later that night, she saw him walk into a government building. She had seen him before. He was part of the Scottish Intelligence Bureau. That's when Isla realized the truth was even darker than she feared. The Black Thistle wasn't just a criminal gang. It had burrowed its way into Scotland's political and security systems. Some of its members wore suits, not ski masks. They passed laws, not bullets. The gang was no longer just surviving. It was thriving inside the institutions meant to destroy it. Back in Glasgow, Callum Reid was quietly expanding the gang's digital reach. He had developed a program that could wipe security footage across multiple locations within seconds. This allowed them to walk into banks, storage facilities, and even police armories without a trace. Meanwhile, Fraser Boyd had been given a new role, removing liabilities, whether they were talkative dealers or suspicious journalists. When 2 investigative reporters were found dead in a staged car accident outside Inverness, Isla knew time was running out. She returned to the city, meeting her sole remaining contact from the task force in an abandoned warehouse. She handed him the flash drive, urging him to get it to an international agency, Interpol or Europol. It was too big for the local police now. Scotland was compromised. But the moment she left the meeting, she knew she had been followed. She noticed the same van from Oban, now parked outside her safe house. Hours later, Her flat was broken into. Her backup drives were gone. Her passport disappeared. The message was clear. They knew who she was, and they were closing in. Isla had only one chance left. She needed to go deeper. Find Ewan Doyle himself, the man at the center, the ghost behind the curtain. If she could expose him, everything might fall apart. But finding him meant stepping into a world even more dangerous than the one she had already infiltrated. It meant walking into the lion's den with nothing but her instincts, and no way out. The search for Ewan Doyle led Isla MacRae into the RSA, deepest shadows of Scotland's criminal underworld, a world even her extensive experience hadn't prepared her for. Doyle wasn't a man who could be tracked through paper trails or phone calls. He was a phantom, a strategist who never appeared at meetings, never left behind fingerprints, and never let his face be caught on camera. Yet his presence loomed over everything, the fear he commanded, the silence his name provoked, and the precise, almost military structure of the Black Thistle. Isla began tracing old military records, using a contact she had once helped during a corruption probe involving army contracts. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Doyle had been part of a covert reconnaissance unit, trained in psychological warfare and counterintelligence. After a mission in the Balkans had gone disastrously wrong, he'd vanished from official records. But one incident stood out. A black market weapons deal in Kosovo that mirrored the shipments Isla had been tracking in Scotland. The tactics, the supply routes, the method of erasing evidence, they were all Doyle's blueprint. She started digging into abandoned properties in remote areas, places away from CCTV, phone towers, and curious neighbors. One such location was a crumbling estate near the Cairngorms, purchased under a fake charity front. Locals whispered about armed men seen at night, unmarked vans, and the sound of helicopters in the early hours. It was enough for Isla to investigate. Disguised as a forestry worker, she hiked into the area with a hidden camera and a GPS beacon sewn into her coat. What she found confirmed her suspicions. The estate wasn't abandoned. It was a fortified base. Hidden surveillance towers, underground storage, satellite dishes masked as old farm equipment.
She counted at least 12 armed guards, all in civilian clothing, but moving with the precision of trained soldiers. In the distance, on a high balcony, she saw him, Ewan Doyle. Taller than she expected, hair graying, eyes constantly scanning.
He stood alone, sipping from a mug as if unaware of the criminal empire he controlled. Isla took photos from the tree line, but as she turned to leave, a twig snapped beneath her foot. It was barely a sound, but it was enough. The next hour was a blur of chase and chaos. She ran through the forest, dodging searchlights and muffled radio chatter. Dogs barked in the distance. A drone buzzed overhead. She barely escaped with her life, crawling into a drainage tunnel that led to a nearby stream. Her coat was gone, and with it the GPS beacon. She was completely alone. 2 days later, she reached a safe house owned by her old informant. Exhausted and injured, she uploaded the photos and audio to a secure server. The file was sent to her contact in Interpol, but within hours, the server was hit with a cyber attack. Everything was wiped. That same night, news broke across Scotland. Chief Superintendent Angus McCall was found dead in his home, an apparent suicide. His confession letter was leaked to the press. In it, he admitted to years of collaboration with organized crime, citing blackmail, threats to his family, and financial desperation. But Isla knew the truth. McCall hadn't written that letter. It was damage control, a carefully crafted sacrifice by the Black Thistle to protect its real leader. Suddenly, a wave of arrests followed. Moira Kincaid disappeared. Fraser Boyd's body was found in a canal, riddled with bullets. Callum Reid's luxury apartment was raided, but he was gone. The Black Thistle was burning its outer shell, cutting loose ends to protect the core. Isla knew the truth. The gang wasn't finished. It was adapting, going deeper underground. Ewan Doyle was still out there, somewhere in the mountains, rebuilding. She had dealt a blow, but it wasn't the end. Now a fugitive in her own country, Isla left Scotland with a new identity. She carried the weight of unfinished justice and the knowledge that the war wasn't over. Somewhere down the line she would return. But not as a detective. The next time she faced Doyle, it would be as something else entirely. Someone without a badge. Someone with nothing left to lose.